Okay, this is another video in the Excel Beginner to Advanced course. This is aimed at people that are looking to compete in Excel eSports or just get better at Excel. So the section we're in now is this data section. So if you haven't watched the fundamentals videos, I would suggest you do that. And then all the chapters on from here are going to be very specific to types of challenges that we get in these Excel eSports games. So I've split those into data cases, game cases, map cases, and programming cases. So this is going to be the intro video to data cases, and then there'll be a video for each of these sections: text, numbers, dates, time, and color. And I'll do some example question solves as a final video to this section before we move on to game cases. So let's just talk about some of the questions you might see, show you some example cases, and we'll go through in order of how I'm going to present the chapters. So the first video I will make in this section will be about text. So this is just a string of text, and here's some questions you could ask about it. How many letters are in it? That's quite easy to do. How many of a given letter are in it? Now that's actually quite hard to do in Excel. Once you have a method to know how many letters are in something, it's quite easy to then answer how many vowels are in something. Then a little bit harder, how many symbols are in this text string? How many capital letters are in this text string? What numbers exist in this text string? Now, most of us will have lambdas for this type of thing. However, you're going to need to know how to do this from first principles. I'm also going to cover ciphers, kind of word values. So that's where letters or words have a specific value associated with them and you need to add them up. How to split sentences into characters. So again, this is a very common thing you need to know how to do. So how would you split this down into individual characters? Well, again, most of us have lambdas, but you'll need to know how to do this from first principles. You'll also need to know how to split into groups of 2, 3, 4, maybe blocks of 10, and so on. So you'll need to know how to do that. And then I'll also talk a bit about extracting patterns now that we can do that with regex. So let's just look at some classic text cases quickly. So you'll have things like this, passing notes. So this is where we have ciphers. So we have a code here that's been shifted by a number of letters in the alphabet. So A moves forward 12 places, B moves forward 12 places, and so on. How do you convert that back and decipher the text? You'll need to know how to do that. Then you have classic cases like this. So this is a list of license plates and speeds separated by colons or semicolons. You need to know how to pull all that data out in a nice, useful way. Then classic things like laundry time. This is one of those questions I mentioned earlier. How many of a given letter are in a pile? How often do they appear? When do they appear? Then you have things like this. So this is a bit like Scrabble. You'll have letters that are worth a certain number of points, and you'll progress to getting words and then need to know how much each word is worth. And so on and so on. And then eventually what word you're able to make with a bunch of tiles from a given dictionary. So those are all things you'll need to know how to do with text. Then with numbers, we've already covered you need to be able to pull numbers out from text. You need to know how to work with decimals and rounding. When I get to the numbers video, I'll touch a little bit on large numbers that are too big for Excel to compute. Another important one is how to convert numbers to text and back again. So if you pull numbers out of a text string, they're often formatted as text and not numbers, and then it's very difficult to add them up and so on unless you manipulate them back into numbers. And then there's also times you want to treat numbers as text, so we'll talk about that. Date challenges come up less often, but you need to know how to be able to work with dates. So you have cases like this, perfect date and soulmate, where we have lists of dates and you need to know how many days holiday these certain people have taken. So just knowing how to determine difference between dates, things like determining the day of the week on a given day, how many Tuesdays between given dates, and then how to deal with pre-1900 dates. So pre-1900 dates, you cannot do mathematical operations in Excel like one minus the other. So I explain how to work with those. Then we'll have a video on time format, so how to find the difference between two times in minutes, hours, seconds, how to look up time intervals. This comes up in a number of formats. So here you're having to minus one time from another and add various minutes and so on and so on. So these can be, if you've never worked with time formats, it can be very tricky. So in this case, you're kind of using a bit of everything, a bit of numbers manipulation, text manipulation, splitting things down into letters, from strings, as well as in the last question, working with time formats and determining finished times based on how many chefs are available to cook the meals and so on and so on. So it can get quite tricky. And then finally, we'll do a video on colors. So this comes up fairly often. So you might have stuff like this, where you have a color that's indicating some information. And in the questions, you need to add up how many of a given color there are. So that can be quite tricky because you can't do this with Excel formulas. You normally need a little bit of VBA or some other clever tricks to turn this into usable data. So there's going to be 5 videos after this one on each of these headers, and then one video to show you some example solves of some of the easier questions you might encounter that these things cover. So the first video is going to be the biggest one. I'll aim to get it out as soon as I can, and I will see you then.